You have this guy who's really known as a heretic fighter.
Okay, we're talking about Augustine here, and what Leighton has asked is, well, how come he got away with just like, the thesis here is that no one had ever believed anything like this before. So, and later on, and I'm just waiting to get to this one, later on, and I think this is what I'd started to mention to you, Leighton makes a comment about something I had said during our debate, because he quoted from Clement of Rome. And I pointed out that Clement of Rome actually taught much from Pauline doctrine and Pauline letters on the subject of the elect and election. And he objected to this. And he uses Wilson. Wilson is the scholar of this movement. That's why they're so invested in this. They needed to have somebody because they didn't have anybody before. And so now they've got this. So they're invested in this. They better start checking around and looking around because, yeah. Anyway, and so he says, I had this problem with James White. He mentions, Clement mentions the elect as if that makes him a Calvinist. And I'm just sitting here going, wow, the way that patristic sources are used by Wilson, you got no room making that objection, A. B, and I guarantee you one thing, Leighton Flowers. You've never read Clement's letter in Greek. You've never taught it at Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary in development of patristic theology from the original language. Have you? Guarantee you, you have not. You have no earthly idea of what you're talking about. But you'll accept what somebody else has to say without checking their sources. Okay. All right. Well, there you go.
So you have this guy who's really known as a heretic fighter. Well, when he brings in something that's not quite right, people still respect him. Even Jerome did not agree with Augustine. So as he gets a little pushback, even the Pope did not agree with him that infant baptism is salvific when you put the baby in the water. He doesn't agree with that, and they're damned if you don't. Now,
again, I have received literally at least 150 pages of graphics, pictures of sources from the friend that I mentioned earlier on the subject of baptism in the early church. And I don't want to use all his stuff. I want him to be able to use his stuff. But did you just hear this? Even the Pope didn't believe. Well, which Pope are we talking about? Because there were a couple popes, obviously, many popes during Augustine's life. And I'm intimately familiar with the North African response to Zosimus and to Pelagius's rehabilitation, because that's where the Rome has spoken, the case is closed stuff comes from, that we had to deal with, again, with subject to Roman Catholicism back in the 90s. But later on, Leighton's going to bring up Eastern Orthodoxy. And basically he's going to say, yeah, the Eastern Orthodox, they didn't have Augustine, they didn't believe any of this stuff. And so therefore, as a result of that, they're just believing what was believed from the beginning in the first 300 years. So why aren't you Eastern Orthodox? I'm wondering, why aren't you? Maybe that's where this is going. Yeah, could be. Could go down the Hank Road. It very well could be. I don't know. I don't know. But there you go.
I'm writing a book right now on God's sovereignty, looking at the historical impact all the way from Augustine, even before then, all the way up through the modern period, and how that happened and what we're viewing.
That's going to be interesting. That's going to be really interesting. Okay. We'll be looking forward to that one.
But the Catholic Church, even to this day, does not readily admit that Augustine taught double predestination, which he does 3 or 4 times in his writings. They won't recognize that because it's they go to his earlier writings and say, well, look, he believed in free will. Well, yeah, he did back then, but in his later writings, he thinks it's worthless. He even says, I tried to say free will, but God's grace triumphed.
He did specifically say that. But what I need to know, please, is what is the Catholic Church to which you refer? How does the Catholic Church has the Catholic Church actually made an official pronouncement on Augustine's perspective on these things? And who made it? Because I know all sorts of Roman Catholic scholars who will honestly admit to pretty much everything that was said by Augustine and the differing perspectives of Augustine and the whole nine yards. So how does the Roman Catholic Church figure in here? How does that work? I'd like to know, because people can say, well, Rome says this and Rome says that and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But I wonder who that actually would refer to. You have to be careful about saying, well, Rome says this and Rome says that.
Among the church fathers, like between Polycarp and Irenaeus or Ignatius, and
we have almost nothing Polycarp ever said. Like, it's all secondary sources.
And other notable, recognized church fathers that may have said, okay, hey, wait, well, look at Romans 9, guys. This is obviously teaching something about God, sovereignty over our choices. Is there any evidence of any of those types of people prior to Augustine that you're aware of?
Okay, now, what should a meaningful scholar say at this point? A meaningful, fair, balanced scholar is going to say, well, there is a lot we don't have. There are entire books that people wrote that we do not possess. For many of the early fathers, we can only answer that question in light of what somebody else said that they said. But in light of that, then we can see multiple different perspectives. We can contrast Clement of Rome with the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas. They're roughly contemporaneous. I think Clement's a good bit earlier, but within 100 years, obviously. And then we have, for example, from Ignatius, we can glean certain things, but he's writing epistles as he's going to die. He's not writing a systematic theology. So there's going to be imbalance even in what we have. And so there is, especially as Greek philosophy takes more and more of an important role, there's going to be a lot of emphasis upon the discussions that the Greeks were having concerning the nature of man. And, then we could get into Justin, and he doesn't have the complete canon. And see, that's what someone who wants to teach history rather than use history, that's how they're going to respond. Let's see what the response was. Not
in the Christian circles. Everybody teaches the same thing, which is what I point out in my Oxford thesis. Where in Christianity does everybody agree? I mean, that just doesn't happen. That's phenomenal that everybody can agree.
For almost 400 years.
Yes. I mean, it's like they all view a general sovereignty of God like a king controlling a country. He doesn't micromanage everybody's, lives. He's there. And it's not until, and they're fighting the dictatorial micromanagement view of Stoicism, Manichaeanism, and Gnosticism.
Okay. Now, have we repeated enough now that you're starting to recognize the theme here? This may get a little old. Sorry. But to draw the parallel, and without the parallel, all this stuff disappears. It becomes irrelevant. It becomes an argument about whether Augustine went back and edited a couple of books later in his life, which no one actually argues or would care one way or the other. But you hear what's being done now? So you take the Stoics, you take the Gnostics, you take the Manichaeans. Differences between each one. Big, important differences as to what determinism would mean to them. None of them have a monotheistic God who is sufficient ground for a meaningful decree of self-glorification. But what you want to do is you want to plant in the mind the idea. They were teaching the same thing. Augustine went back, picked it up. That's where it came from. No one had ever dreamed of this. Don't worry about what anybody said before this. Don't read anything that Clement said. Don't read the Epistle to Dionysius. You don't look. No, don't. They were all on the same page. They were Southern Baptist provisionists. Best they were. Just believe me. I went to Oxford. I know. I read it all. See? And we're supposed to go, so this massive difference in what the decree would even look like, what it'd be based upon, what it could be. We're just supposed to go, don't have to worry about that. Yeah, basically. That's what we're being told.
So for all these years, they're saying the same thing until you hit Augustine. There is no debate. And that's commonly known. I mean, the encyclopedias and the big guys who write those point that out, that there was no conflict between human free will and divine sovereignty until Augustine. That's when it started.
So there's your super simplistic assertion. Your super simplistic assertion. It only started then. Historically, you had discussions of the nature of the will prior to this, where there were disagreements. How do I know this? Because I've studied church history. But it was primarily in reference to the human will of Jesus, because the focus and the energy was on Christology. So Nestorianism, Apollinarianism, Eutychianism, they're all directly relevant. The whole hypostatic union is relevant to anthropology and the nature of the human soul. But a argument on this subject had not come up till this point. There was no debate. That's right, there was no debate. Not because it was something that everybody had already decided on and there was a unanimous position. That's the faux position here. Is that, yeah, we've all discussed that. We're all on the same page. Everybody believed the same thing. And then Augustine came along and turned us all into Manichaeans. No. If you think history works that way, then you need to go read a book called The Trail of Blood, because it's a little bit more along your lines, sadly. Sort of a conspiratorial type thing. All right.